All right, so get ready for a deep dive that's, well, it's tailored just for you. We're tackling Immanuel Kant, and more specifically, his theory of judgment. You sent over some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on that very topic, so let's see if we can unearth some real gems.
Kant's theory of judgment, it's always a fascinating labyrinth to explore. I think you'll find some pretty intriguing twists and turns in his ideas.
Okay, so how do we start with the basics then? Like, how did Kant even define judgment in the first place? Because it sounds like he wasn't exactly satisfied with, like, the traditional take on it.
Oh, he absolutely was not. The old school, they saw judgment as this simple act of relating concepts, almost like, a mental filing system.
Hmm.
But Kant flips the script entirely. He sees judgment as this dynamic, unifying cognitive act that brings together everything. We're talking senses, imagination, understanding, even reason. Like it's all coming together to help us make sense of the world.
So it's not just about, like, passively sorting things into categories then. We're actively constructing our reality through judgment.
Exactly. Kant argues that this is what makes judgment the central cognitive faculty. It's what makes us distinctly human. You could even say we're all just judging animals.
That's, oh, wow. That's an image I won't soon forget. And the source points out that these judgments are propositional, meaning they express these statements that can be true or false.
Right. Judgments are the building blocks of any knowledge claim, of logical reasoning. But here's where things take a bit of a Kantian turn, shall we say. We're entering the realm of his transcendental idealism.
Ah, yes, transcendental idealism. I love that term.
Yeah.
But the source mentions that, we only ever really truly know phenomena, the world as it appears to us, shaped by our minds. So are you saying the world out there isn't actually real?
Not quite, not quite. It's more nuanced than that. Kant isn't saying reality is an illusion. He's saying that our minds actually structure how we experience that reality.
Okay, so think of it like this then. We've got the raw data of the world coming in through our senses, right?
Hmm.
But our minds are providing the framework,
Yeah.
the organizing principles. That's what makes it all make sense.
Well, that's a great way to put it. And this whole co-creation thing, it has some really profound implications for how Kant views truth.
Oh, I bet.
At the empirical level, he's a realist. He believes there are facts about the world, but transcendentally, it's our judgments that actually confer truth onto those facts. We're imposing order on the chaos, you see.
Wait, so you're saying our minds are shaping truth itself? That's a bold claim.
It is bold.
Mhm.
And it gets to the heart of Kant's transcendental idealism. He's saying the categories of our understanding, those basic concepts we use to make sense of the world, they are what allow us to make objectively valid judgments about reality.
So it's not just that we're mirroring reality, then we're almost internalizing it within our own representations.
Exactly. Which leads to a really, really interesting question. If objects of experience are essentially identical to the content of objectively valid judgments, what happens when we encounter something that just doesn't fit neatly into our existing categories?
That's a great point. And I know Kant has a whole system for categorizing different types of judgments.
He does. He breaks judgments down in a few key ways. Analytic versus synthetic, a priori versus a posteriori. Now, those distinctions might sound a bit familiar, but with Kant, they take on a whole new level of complexity.
The source definitely goes into detail on those definitions. But for someone already familiar with those terms, what's the main takeaway here? Where does he really flip the script?
It's his concept of synthetic a priori judgments. Those are the real game changers. He argues that they form the bedrock of fields like mathematics, physics, even metaphysics.
So these judgments, they're necessarily true, but their truth doesn't come from just the meaning of the concepts themselves. There's something more to it.
Precisely. Their truth is tied to the very structure of our experience. Think about that classic example, 7 plus 5 equals 12. Seems self-evident, right?
Right.
But Kant argues that there could be entire worlds where that wouldn't even be truth values.
Hold on. Are you saying basic arithmetic might not be universally true? That kind of blows my mind.
It is a radical idea, and it's one of the most fascinating aspects of Kant's philosophy. He's suggesting that even those seemingly self-evident truths are, in a sense, contingent on the structure of human experience.
So we've got this incredibly powerful system of judgment. It's shaping our reality, maybe even truth itself. But I imagine there's some challenges to this whole framework,
Of
right?
course, no philosophical system is without its problems. The source highlights a couple of key issues. One being this idea of non-conceptual content, stuff we might perceive without having the concepts to grasp it. This could lead to, well, what some philosophers call rogue objects, things that just don't fit into Kant's system.
So there might be things we experience that totally defy categorization, that just slip through the cracks of our understanding.
Exactly. And that creates a real problem for Kant because his entire system is built on this idea that the categories of understanding apply universally to experience. If there are these exceptions, these things we can experience but not conceptualize, well, it throws a wrench in the whole thing.
So even with this incredible power of judgment to shape our reality, there might be limits to what we can actually even grasp.
It seems so, and that leads to another really fascinating challenge, the problem of dream skepticism.
Right, the classic philosophical head scratcher.
Yeah.
How can we be certain that we're not just dreaming all of this?
Exactly. And Kant, he grapples with this throughout his work. He tries to link inner and outer experience, argues that our sense of self requires this interaction with an objective world, but there's still this gap. How can we be certain that any individual judgment isn't just part of a dream?
So even with the structure of transcendental idealism, there's this lingering possibility that our whole experience is just an elaborate fabrication of our minds.
It's a possibility that's hard to, definitively rule out, and it raises some really profound questions about the nature of knowledge and reality. But let's shift gears for a moment and explore how Kant applies his theory of judgment to specific areas of knowledge. The source mentions mathematics and physics as key examples.
Okay, so how does this whole system of judgment play out in those fields?
Well, for Kant, mathematics is like the shining example of synthetic a priori knowledge. Remember, these are judgments whose truth depends on something more than just the meaning of the concepts involved, and they're known independent of any particular experience.
Right, so how can a mathematical statement be both of those things? It seems like a contradiction.
It does, doesn't it? But Kant argues that mathematical truths are actually grounded in the pure intuitions of space and time. These intuitions are a priori. We don't derive them from experience, but they're also synthetic because they tell us something substantive about the structure of the world.
Okay, so let me see if I'm following this. A statement like, a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. It's both necessarily true, and it also tells us something meaningful about the nature of space itself.
Exactly. And this applies to all of Euclidean geometry. It's a system of truths that are grounded in our a priori intuitions of space. Pretty mind-blowing, right?
It really is. And it makes you wonder if other mathematical systems, based on different conceptions of space, could also be considered valid in some way.
That's a great question and one that mathematicians and philosophers are still grappling with today. But let's move on to physics. How does Kant see that fitting into his framework?
Well, physics seems a bit more, methy than pure mathematics. It relies on observation and experimentation, not
Yeah.
just pure reason.
You're right. And for Kant, physics is indeed more complex. He sees it as involving both a priori principles like causality and empirical observations. It's a kind of hybrid system.
So it's a mix of synthetic a priori and synthetic a posteriori judgments.
Precisely. The a priori principles provide the framework, the underlying rules governing how we understand the physical world. But the specific laws of physics, those are derived from actually observing and interacting with the world.
So, for example, the law of gravity isn't something we can just, think up in our heads. We have to observe falling apples and orbiting planets to figure it out.
Exactly. But once we have those empirical laws, we understand them within the framework of a priori principles like causality. We naturally assume that the apple falls because of gravity, that there's this cause and effect relationship at play. So for Kant, physics is this fascinating interplay between reason and experience.
It sounds like he's trying to find this middle ground between rationalism and empiricism.
Mhm.
He's not saying that all knowledge comes from pure reason, but he's also not saying it's all just a blank slate written on by experience.
That's a great insight. He's trying to account for the fact that we seem to have both innate knowledge, like those intuitions of space and time, and knowledge that comes from, interacting with the world, and judgment is the bridge that connects those two realms.
That makes a lot of sense. But before we move on, I'm still kind of stuck on this whole dream skepticism thing. Did Kant have any other responses to that challenge?
He did. In his later work, he argues that the very possibility of self-consciousness requires an objective world to interact with.
So you're saying we couldn't even have a coherent sense of ourselves as thinking beings if we were just dreaming all the time?
That's the idea. He's trying to show that there's this fundamental connection between our inner world of thought and the outer world of experience. We can't have one without the other.
So the very fact that we're, having this conversation, questioning our own existence, is somehow evidence that there's something more than just a dream world out there.
That's one way to interpret it. But even with these arguments, the debate about dream skepticism never really goes away. It's one of those enduring philosophical mysteries.
I guess that's part of what makes philosophy so, endlessly fascinating. There are always more questions to explore.
Absolutely. And there's still so much more to unpack in Kant's theory of judgment. We haven't even touched on his ideas about aesthetics or morality or teleology, but for now, let's take a pause and come back for the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back. It's really amazing how much ground we've covered with Kant's theory of judgment. From shaping reality to maybe even truth itself, it's been quite a journey.
It really has. We've gone from those foundational elements of his system to some of its most perplexing challenges. And as any philosopher knows, a sturdy foundation is essential for building a coherent philosophical framework.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even the sturdiest frameworks can have their quirks and complexities, and Kant's philosophy definitely doesn't shy away from those.
True. And I think one of the most captivating aspects of his theory is how it bridges that gap between our inner world of thought and the outer world of experience.
Right. This idea that our judgments aren't just mirroring reality. They're actively constructing our understanding of it. It's almost like we're participating in the creation of the world we experience.
Precisely. And this bridge between thought and experience is built on those famous Kantian categories of understanding. Those fundamental concepts like causality, substance, and unity, the tools our minds use to organize the raw data of sensation.
So it's not just this chaotic storm of sensory input hitting us constantly. Our minds have this inherent structure that imposes order and meaning onto that chaos.
Exactly. It's like our minds have this set of lenses through which we perceive and interpret the world, and these lenses, according to Kant, are universal to all rational beings. That's a pretty powerful concept.
It is. It suggests there's this shared structure of understanding that unites all human minds. This common ground from which we can build knowledge.
Yes. Kant called this the transcendental unity of apperception, and he argued that it's what makes objective knowledge possible. It's the foundation for shared experiences and communication.
But even with this shared structure, there's still room for individual interpretation and subjective experience,
But
right? It's
yeah.
not like we're all seeing the world in some perfectly uniform way.
Of course not. Kant doesn't deny the richness and diversity of human experience, but he argues that, beneath this surface level of individual perception, there's a deeper level of unity. A shared framework that makes meaningful experience possible in the first place.
And this all ties back to that idea of transcendental truth we talked about earlier. It's not just about individual judgments mashing up with isolated facts. It's about a whole system of judgments. A coherent web of understanding that reflects the underlying structure of reality.
Yeah.
A reality that's shaped by our minds, of course.
That's a fantastic way to put it. Transcendental truth for Kant isn't about correspondence with some mind-independent reality. It's about coherence and consistency within the system of judgments that makes up our experience.
It's a self-contained system in a way,
Mm.
but one that's still grounded in the world through our senses and our interactions with objects. We're not floating off in some abstract mental realm.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance between the subjective and the objective, between the structuring power of our minds and the constraints of the world we experience.
But even with this balance, there's still that lingering question of dream skepticism. How can we be absolutely sure right now that we're not just caught in this elaborate dream?
Ah, yes. The philosophical shadow that follows us everywhere. Kant does offer some further responses to this. He argues that our experience has this kind of coherence and consistency that dreams typically lack. There's a logic to it, a structure that persists over time.
So the very structure of our experience, the way our judgments hang together, could be a kind of evidence against the dream hypothesis.
That's one way to think about it. He also points the fact that our experience often resists our will. We can't just choose to experience things differently. There's a pushback from the world, a sense of external constraint that dreams usually don't have.
It's like reality has this way of reminding us that it's not all just in our heads, that there's something more out there.
Exactly. But ultimately, Kant acknowledges that there's no absolute, ironclad proof against dream skepticism. It,
Yeah.
it remains this philosophical possibility, this nagging doubt that we can never entirely eliminate.
And maybe that's the part of what keeps philosophy and life itself
Yeah.
so captivating. This persistent possibility of doubt keeps us questioning, exploring, and pushing the boundaries of our understanding.
I couldn't agree more, and that's what Kant's theory of judgment ultimately invites us to do, to engage in this ongoing process of critical reflection, to
Right.
to question our assumptions, to strive for a deeper, more coherent understanding of the world and our place within it.
Well said. So to wrap things up, I think it's safe to say that Kant's theory of judgment offers this powerful and nuanced framework for understanding how our minds interact with the world.
Yeah.
It challenges us to see knowledge as this incredible co-creation, a dynamic interplay between the structure of our minds and the constraints of our experience.
And while it doesn't offer easy answers or absolute certainty, it provides this rich and fertile ground for further philosophical exploration. As Kant might say, the true value of philosophy lies not in the answers it provides, but in the questions it provokes. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the mind and the world.
Beautifully put. Thank you for joining us on this Kantian adventure. We hope you've come away with a renewed appreciation for the power and the complexity of judgment. Until next time, happy philosophizing.